prices to rise. We're going to review the basics of blanket purchase orders, the problems you might encounter, and that recent court case. Make sure you stick around until the end when we share the results of that recent court ruling that demonstrate you might not be getting the price protection you thought you were from your blanket purchase orders. But before we get to that, let's go over the basics. By the way, you may also hear blanket purchase orders referred to as standing purchase orders. You'll see it abbreviated as BPO. It is an agreement made between a buyer and a seller, or a supplier and a customer, where the buyer provides the seller with a standing order to provide goods or services on a recurring basis for a certain period of time. The terms and conditions, including pricing, are spelled out. Sounds simple, right? But here's where most organizations get tripped up, especially when that pricing isn't as locked in as they think. The components of a blanket purchase order are similar to those of a regular purchase order, with some variations. So let's go over them. Coverage. As you might have guessed by now, one blanket purchase order covers multiple invoices. Typically, with a regular purchase order, it only covers one invoice, although some, but definitely not all, will allow multiple invoices in the cases of partial ship. Blanket purchase order number. Similar to a standard purchase order, each one will have a number associated with it, making it easier for tracking purposes. It is generally tied to the requisition associated with it, and it is used in accounts payable for the three-way match when the processor is verifying the accuracy of the submitted invoice. Life or duration. This is one of the areas that is very different from a standard PO. Blanket purchase orders are commonly issued for a set period of time, frequently 1 year, and they can be extended based on an agreement between the buyer and the supplier. Pricing. The prices of the goods or services are usually fixed in the blanket PO. We'll address this issue in further detail later on when we talk about that court case. Ordering. Under a blanket purchase order, orders can be placed as frequently or as infrequently as needed until the contract expires or the maximum order limit on the blanket purchase order is reached, whichever comes first. Timing and amounts. Blanket purchase orders offer flexibility in terms of quantities and delivery schedules. The exact quantity and delivery dates don't have to be specified upfront, but rather as needed. Oftentimes, the quantity isn't indicated, and the blanket purchase order says something like, as needed. As you will see later on, this could create a huge problem, especially if prices skyrocket. Cancellation policy. This outlines the terms and conditions under which an order can be canceled. The policy may vary widely based on the agreement between the buyer and seller, but typically includes a notice period, a cancellation fee amount, the conditions for the cancellation, and the process for the cancellation. There may be a limit on the time frame that allows an order to be canceled. Some of the reasons companies like purchase orders are probably pretty obvious now, but let's quickly go over them because they are not all that obvious. So why do folks use blanket purchase orders? The most obvious reason is it streamlines the procurement process for repetitive purchases, making the process more efficient. Instead of issuing individual purchase orders each time a product or service is needed, a blanket purchase order allows for multiple deliveries of the same product over a specific period of time under the same blanket purchase order. Price stability is often stated as a reason, as price volatility can be a major concern in procurement. With a blanket purchase order, the price of the goods or services is typically fixed for the duration of the long-term contract. This means, in theory, that even if the market prices fluctuate, the cost to the buyer remains stable. We'll investigate this later on because it appears this is not always the case, despite what the issuer of the blanket purchase order believes. Typically, blanket purchase orders offer a degree of flexibility, a high degree of flexibility that allows for adjustments in quantities and delivery schedules based on the buyer's need. The exact quantities and delivery dates don't have to be specified up front, which can be extremely useful when dealing with an unpredictable demand or changing business conditions. By committing to a long-term agreement, blanket purchase orders can help strengthen the relationship between the buyer and the seller, can lead to improved communication, better understanding of each other's needs and expectations, and potentially better service or unit pricing terms. Also, by consolidating orders with one supplier and committing to a much larger total volume of purchases over time, you should be able to negotiate better prices, which will lead to cost saving. But all that glitters isn't cost-effective gold. Let's talk about some of the drawbacks. While having a long-term agreement with a supplier can have its advantages, it can also create a certain level of dependence on that supplier. If the supplier experiences issues such as financial instability, production problems, or quality issues, it can impact significantly on the customer's business. If the supplier goes bankrupt or out of business, this can mean a strategic nightmare for that customer who has been depending on them. That's why, no matter how much an organization likes one supplier, they're usually advised to have more than one supplier for all key components. There's another issue with blanket purchase orders that is frequently ignored. Locking into a blanket purchase order with a single supplier may result in missing out on competitive pricing from other suppliers. Market prices can fluctuate, better deals can become available. But if the purchaser has committed to an agreed upon price for an agreed upon amount over the duration of the contract, and this contract requires certain levels of purchases, they may not be able to take advantage of the better pricing being offered by the competitor. This is an example of when a blanket purchase order can be viewed as a double-edged sword. So this brings us to the issue of just when should you use blanket purchase orders. The most common example is for ordering office supplies, assuming the organization uses a great deal of them. The quantities of the goods or services are needed throughout a period of time and therefore are reordered regularly. Also, they make sense under any of the following conditions. If a single vendor is capable of delivering throughout the length of the contract. This is why some will do a credit review of the supplier before issuing that blanket purchase order. If the unit cost can be well defined and the details specified, or if ordering in quantity facilitates more favorable contract terms and quantity discounts. Alrighty, now let's talk problems, because this is where even the seasoned pros get burned. Once you've decided to go the blanket purchase order route, you'll probably want to avoid some of the common problems. So let's take a look at common problem number one: assigning incorrect invoices to that blanket PO. It is more important than ever that the suppliers include purchase order numbers on their invoices. That way, your processors don't have to guess which purchase order to assign an invoice to. And when they're guessing, those blanket POs are very convenient. They can solve a lot of problems, not the way you'd like. The common problem number two: not recognizing a second copy of an invoice and paying it after assigning it to a blanket PO. As blanket POs are utilized for multiple purchases throughout a given period of time, organizations run the risk of receiving multiple invoice copies for the same goods shipped or the services performed. This problem has exploded in recent years, as now 25% of all invoices that are sent are copies of previously sent invoices. Extra care must be taken to ensure that these don't inadvertently get paid because they're just blindly assigned to the blanket purchase order. Oftentimes, the purchase order controls will not prevent these invoices from being paid twice when they have that valid PO number and its reference. It is essential invoices reflect exactly what the PO calls for, and extra care needs to be taken to ensure that the same invoice number has not been previously entered and that your processes are not changing invoice numbers slightly to push them through when they don't realize that it's a second copy of a previously paid invoice.